November 22nd, 1963. Dallas, Texas. President John F. Kennedy's motorcade rolls through Dealey Plaza. The crowd is cheering, cameras are flashing, Jackie Kennedy is waving beside him. Then a shot rings out, but in this timeline, the bullet misses. The Secret Service reacts faster. Kennedy is shoved down, the car speeds away. Panic erupts in the streets. America does not watch its young president die. America watches him survive, and suddenly the 1960s change. Not into a perfect decade. Vietnam still exists. Racism still exists. The Cold War still exists. But now John F. Kennedy gets something history never gave him. A second act. Welcome back to What If? Today we're asking, what if JFK had never been assassinated? And the answer is not, everything becomes peaceful. The answer is much more interesting, because JFK surviving does not stop the storm. It just changes who has to fly through it. Part 1. The President Who Lived. After the failed assassination, Dallas becomes the center of the world. Lee Harvey Oswald is still arrested. The country is still terrified. But this time, Kennedy is alive to speak for himself. A few days later, JFK appears on television. He looks pale, tired, shaken, but alive. And he gives the biggest speech of his presidency. He tells Americans that political hatred has gone too far. He says the country cannot fight communism overseas while tearing itself apart at home. He calls for unity, courage, and a renewed commitment to democracy. For a brief moment, the nation listens. Not forever. This is still America in the 1960s. The arguments come roaring back, but Kennedy is changed. Before Dallas, he was young, rich, charming, and sometimes seen as more style than substance. After Dallas, he becomes the president who survived. That gives him power, and he uses it quickly. Part 2. Civil rights becomes his fight. The first major battle is civil rights. In real history, Kennedy supported civil rights, but Lyndon Johnson was the one who forced the Civil Rights Act through Congress after JFK died. In this timeline, Kennedy has to do it himself. And it is not easy. Southern Democrats fight him. Segregationists stall. Speeches are not enough. So Kennedy does something smart. He lets Lyndon Johnson do what Lyndon Johnson does best. Johnson works the Senate. Kennedy works the public. Robert Kennedy pressures behind the scenes. Together, they push civil rights as the great moral test of the decade. The Civil Rights Act still passes in 1964. Kennedy signs it on live television. It is the greatest victory of his presidency. But it also has a cost. The South begins turning against the Democratic Party even faster. Kennedy wins the battle, but American politics starts cracking apart. Part 3. JFK wins 1964. Then comes the 1964 election. Barry Goldwater still runs as the Republican nominee. He campaigns on anti-communism, states' rights, and smaller government. But instead of facing Lyndon Johnson, he faces a president who just survived an assassination attempt and passed civil rights legislation. That is a brutal matchup. Kennedy is famous, Kennedy is sympathetic, Kennedy looks steady in a dangerous world. Goldwater still wins parts of the Deep South. But nationally, Kennedy wins re-election. Not as massively as Johnson did in real life, but clearly enough to claim a mandate. And now, JFK has 4 more years. But this is where the story gets darker, because the biggest trap of the 1960s is still waiting. Vietnam. Part 4. Vietnam still pulls him in. A lot of people imagine that if JFK lived, America avoids Vietnam. Maybe, but probably not completely. Kennedy was cautious about sending huge numbers of ground troops, but he was still a Cold War president. He did not want to look weak. He did not want to be blamed for losing South Vietnam to communism. So he tries to split the difference. No massive ground war right away. No huge Johnson-style escalation in 1965. Instead, Kennedy sends more advisors, more equipment, more air support, and more pressure. He wants a limited war, a controlled war, a war that does not consume his presidency. But Vietnam does not care what presidents want. South Vietnam remains unstable. The Viet Cong keep gaining ground. American advisors keep dying. Generals demand more troops. Republicans accuse Kennedy of weakness. Slowly, the war becomes his. By 1966, the United States is deeper in Vietnam than Kennedy ever wanted. Not as deep as in our timeline, but deep enough. And now, the young president of hope is becoming a war president. Part 5. A smaller great society. Back home, Kennedy pushes reforms, but he is not Lyndon Johnson. Johnson wanted to bulldoze Congress and build the Great Society. Medicare, Medicaid, voting rights, education funding, anti-poverty programs. Kennedy is smoother but less forceful, so in this timeline, America still gets progress but less of it. Civil rights passes. Voting rights probably still passes after the violence in Selma shocks the nation. Medicare may happen too, but later, and with more compromise. The country moves forward, just not as dramatically. America gets Kennedy's inspiration, but it loses some of Johnson's machinery. Part 6. 1968 still explodes. By 1968, the country is exhausted. Vietnam is still going. Protests are spreading. Cities are tense. Young Americans are furious. Conservatives want order. Liberals feel betrayed, and Kennedy cannot run again. So the Democratic Party tears itself apart. Robert Kennedy runs as the heir to his brother's legacy. Hubert Humphrey represents the party establishment. Anti-war Democrats demand a clean break from Vietnam, and Richard Nixon watches from the Republican side with one message: America needs order. In this timeline, 1968 is still chaotic. Maybe Nixon still wins. Maybe Robert Kennedy beats him in a close race, but either way, the Kennedy name is no longer just a symbol of hope. It is now tied to Vietnam, civil rights, protest, and the unfinished business of the 1960s. So, what really changes if JFK survives? The Civil Rights Act still happens, but Kennedy gets the credit. Vietnam still happens, but probably slower and smaller. The Great Society becomes less ambitious. The Democratic Party still cracks, and America still faces the chaos of the late 1960s. But the biggest change is JFK himself. In our timeline, he became a legend frozen in time. Young, handsome, hopeful, and unfinished. In this timeline, he grows older on camera. He wins. He compromises. He disappoints people. He makes mistakes. He becomes less of a myth and more of a president. And that may be the most realistic answer. If JFK had never been assassinated, he might not have saved the 1960s. He simply would have had to survive them. Because sometimes history does not change by becoming easier. Sometimes it changes by forcing the hero to keep going. That was today's alternate timeline. Subscribe to What If for more history that almost happened, and comment what timeline we should break next.